Great, Dawn.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Dawn Ying, Executive Vice President of 6th District PTA, and we'd like to welcome you to our Parenting in a Pandemic series. Tonight, we're welcoming Susan Stone, who's a coach, speaker, and author. She is a certified special education teacher with 2 decades of experience working with children and families. She has presented hundreds of talks to the Bay Area groups, and she focuses on healthy communication and effective discipline for all ages. Susan's wide range of professional experience includes operating home-based preschools, teaching teenagers with emotional and behavioral problems in juvenile hall, and managing crisis hotlines for parents and teens. Susan is a mom to an adult son and daughter, and is the author of Real Parent, Real Kids, Real Talk, a book about parents for children of all ages. So welcome very much tonight, Susan.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Eric, and thank all you parents who have joined us tonight. It's so impressive to me that all of you have been home all day with your kids. Some of you have been working from home with your kids, and yet you have the energy to join a parenting workshop at night. So as I always say, I know that really good parents come to parenting talks. So it's exciting for me to be here and to be speaking with you. My children, I raised them in Cupertino, so I was part of the 6th District PTA. I wasn't as busy as Dawn was, but I was involved with my school's PTA. I was always the book sale, you know, when we had that week-long book sale. I always managed that. That was my favorite thing. So anyways, it's really nice to be here tonight. I appreciate it. We're here tonight talking about what we're going to talk about is social skills. You know, socialization is something that a lot of parents are a little bit nervous about, that our kids are missing out on socializing. Our kids are missing out on the skills that they learn when they're at school with other kids, and the skills that they learn while they're playing with kids. So what I'm going to do tonight is I have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you, and I'm going to share that. And then when I turn it off, then we'll be able to get into the questions. It's not a very long presentation, and so I urge you to put any kind of questions into that Q&A, as Eric had mentioned. Also, please understand, we're not limited to questions about necessarily my presentation. Really, if you have any questions about parenting, we can go in that direction also. So now let me go into sharing my screen, which always takes me a minute, so I apologize for taking a minute to start that. So we're going to talk tonight about developing social skills even while social distancing, because again, this is a big concern for a lot of us today. I always start all my parenting talks. I've been working with parents for many, many decades. I've been a parent for many decades. My son Brandon is 36 and my daughter Casey is 32. So they're not at home with me anymore. They've branched out and they each actually live in Colorado because that's where they could afford to be. But I always think about parenting as one long journey. So it's been a long time since I've had them in the, a PTA, but I'm still parenting even though I'm an adult and even though they're adults. So if we look at my 4 pictures here, first we see our toddlers, and then our toddlers become kids, and then our kids become teens, and then our teens become college age, and then the college age become adults. And again, to me, it's just one long journey. And all the talks that I give, I always start with an overview of parenting. Everything that I teach, I believe works at every age. So whether you have a preschooler or a kindergartner or a 4th grader or a 6th grader or a high schooler, all of this stuff works at every age because, again, parenting is, one long spectrum. So first of all, an overview of parenting. I believe that the goal of parenting is to raise what I call a successful adult. It's what I talk about in my book. And it's just the overriding philosophy of my parenting. And again, everybody, all those kids in the pictures, we think we're raising children. We're not raising children. We're raising successful adults, and that we all have the goal. They just happen to be younger. They're not adults yet. But the goal of parenting is to raise a successful adult. And let's talk about what that definition means. Let's talk about what successful means. So the way we get to answering that question is I ask you to think about, what do you want your child to be like when they're 21 years old? Here we call kids adults when they hit 21. They can legally drink, and they're finishing college, and they're moving out, and they're branching out on their own. So we call them adults at 21. But something important to remember is that children's brains, adults' brains, are not fully developed until they become more like 26 or 27. And so they have an undeveloped brain. The last part of the brain that develops is the prefrontal cortex, and that's the part of the brain that helps us to stop and think and make good choices. So when your 3-year-old or your 6-year-old or your 9-year-old does something silly, and you look at them and you go, "Why did you do that?" The answer is because my brain's not fully developed, and because it sounded good at the time. We're looking at them with our adult brain, and they're looking at it with their kid brain, and it's something important for us to remember, that they have a different way of looking at things than we do. But what do you want your children to be like at 21? And I said that when Brandon was born, I had already been working with kids for 16 years. And when Brandon was born, I said on his 21st birthday, I want him to be honest and kind and responsible and capable and close to me, emotionally close to me, to have a good relationship. And if on 21 he is those things, then I will know that I've raised a successful adult. So that's my list, but I urge every parent watching me tonight to look at your parenting partner later on and say, yeah, what's our list? What are we trying to teach? What are the values and traits that we want our children to have? If we then think to ourselves that everything has to be taught, children are not born knowing how to be honest and kind and responsible and capable, but we can teach them. And we can teach them long before they need to do it by themselves. So if we look at a couple of silly examples, and if we look at the bottom of our screen at our college age kids, they're away at college and they're doing their own laundry. So we have to teach our kids how to do laundry so they're able to do it by the time they get to college. If we wait until they're teens to say, do your own laundry, they're going to argue with us about it. So look up at the top, look at your preschoolers. We can teach our littlest ones to put their dirty clothes in the hamper. We can teach our medium ones to sort. You can teach your 6th graders to start contributing to doing laundry so that they can do it long before they have to do it by themselves. Another example I think of is that we need successful adults know how to handle disappointment. So we need to start teaching our kids at whatever age your children are right now. You need to start teaching them how to handle disappointment, because our teens and our college age and our successful adults, they pretty much have to handle disappointment by themselves. So we need to start teaching them long before they need to do it by themselves. So it's not really very important that our little ones are honest. They don't really understand the difference between honest and lying. It's really important that your teens be honest. So let's start teaching, whatever age your children are now, let's start teaching them to have those traits and values that you want them to have. What's the easiest way to teach those traits and values? Well, of course, it's by being a role model. It's by recognizing that your children at all ages, they are watching you all the time. And the little ones, they want to be just like you. The teens, they don't want to be anything like you. But our younger ones want to be just like you. And so I want you to be the person you want your child to be. And I want you to act the way you want your child to act. be aware that your actions speak a lot louder than words. And it's really simple. Be the person you want your child to be. I was on an airplane once that got struck by lightning, and it was quite terrifying. It was a big burst of light and an explosion sound. And the first thing I did was I looked at the flight attendant and I said, that person knows more than me. I'm going to look at that person and I'm going to judge what I should do. And of course, that's exactly what your children are doing. So when you are with your kids, be the person you want them to be and act the way you want them to act. And then the final thing I'll say on this slide is that I believe that teaching our children how to make good choices is perhaps the most important thing we can teach. And again, remember what I said, the prefrontal cortex, the part that helps us make good choices, it's not fully developed until much later in life, into mid-20s, but we need to start teaching our kids how to make good choices. So we allow our kids to make some choices and we allow them to feel the consequences of the choice they make. So that's my overview of parenting. That bottom piece about good choices is what I use to teach classes in discipline. So if perhaps there'll be questions that come up later more about that, but we want to continue moving forward with our topic for tonight. So really what we're talking about tonight is the fact that, as I said, we are concerned that perhaps our kids are losing out on some social and emotional learning. We call it SEL. It's an official term. Maybe some of you are educators and know that term. But we're going to talk about a little bit about what that is. So first of all, the definition of it is it's the development of healthy relationships and emotional connections. And of course, that's what we want with our kids, is we want our kids to develop healthy relationships. We want them to develop emotional connections. If you remember, I said one of the things that I wanted for my kids when they were adults, that I would know they were successful adults, is if they had a healthy relationship and an emotional connection with their parents, because that really is what life is all about. And so if we look at I popped this up all at once. If we look at the skills that are included, what children learn through social and emotional development is they learn to make good choices, they learn to consider others' feelings, they learn to set and work toward a goal, they learn to identify, understand, and manage emotions, they learn to develop strong relationships, and they learn to share with others. And of course, these are all things that children learn in school when they work together, when they're asked to work perhaps with younger kids, when they need to manage their emotions, when the teacher, and I'm talking about when kids are in school, and they're dealing with a teacher. Now they're not dealing with the teacher as much, only through a screen, but they're dealing with you. And I would imagine that some of your kids are exhibiting some pretty big emotions. As a coach, I work with a lot of families one-on-one, and that's what I'm hearing, is that our kids are expressing some pretty big emotions and reacting in some pretty big ways. But we want to help them identify and understand and manage those. They develop strong relationships with people at school, with friends, and with the custodian, and with the librarian, and with their teachers. And of course, they also learn to share, whether it's sharing their thoughts, sharing their ideas, sharing their skills. So these are things that we are working on when we're working on social and emotional learning. And then ways to achieve this is encouraging positive behavior and working as a team and allowing and supporting those strong emotions. We want to teach them empathy. We want to hold family meetings, and you can eat meals together. So if you, again, look at the skills, those are the things that we want to be teaching our children at home. So you do need to let them make some choices. Perhaps they can choose what clothes they wear. Perhaps they can choose what they eat at a meal time. I mean, you serve the meal, but then it's up to them what they eat. You can let them decide which homework assignment they do first. You could let them choose maybe how many stories they want before bed. We have to give our kids some choices, and then we let them learn that good choices have good consequences and bad choices have bad consequences. So you absolutely want to be working with encouraging some choices and offering them to your kids. When I finish sharing this, I'd love to ask you guys a couple questions and to find out like what kind of choices do you let your kids make at home? Because I think we all can learn from each other at this workshop. You can encourage positive behavior by, again, behavior is a choice. You can tell them that, first we do this and then we do that. So first you do your homework and then you can play your video games. So we encourage them to make some good choices around that. We can work as a team. Perhaps you can cook with your kids or do something like that to work as a team. You can allow and support those strong emotions. A lot of parents just use the words like they're happy or they're sad or they're mad, but there's a whole range of emotions, and people can be irritated and gleeful and joyful and frustrated. And I encourage you to teach your kids all those kinds of words for emotions, and use those words and help them identify what they're feeling, and then help them identify what they do with those emotions. It's totally okay to be angry. It's okay to be frustrated. It's what we do with our anger and our frustration that matters. And so that's something that we definitely want to talk about with our kids. We certainly can teach empathy. That's something you can work on at home. We can read stories about it. You can ask, oh my, what do you think that person feels about that? If you're walking down the street and you see something, you can talk about that. I like having family meetings. Perhaps you have it once a week or once a month, when you literally get together as a family and say, let's talk about how this week or how this month went. Let's look at what's coming up for the next week or the month. And it's an opportunity to get together, talk about how things are going, plan for the week or the month ahead, and move forward. And then, of course, I always want you to eat meals together. And of course, now you're eating all your meals together. But as kids get older, for those of you who have older teens, you know that they're not always around at mealtime. I think they're around a lot more now. I understand that. But eating meals is an opportunity to teach social and emotional development. I just want everyone to recognize that I know there's lots of questions, and I see people raising their hands, and I promise that we're going to get to all those questions at the end. I'm just going to try to power through here and finish the presentation first, and then I'll turn that off and we'll come back to questions. So I love questions, so that's great. Keep popping them in there. Okay, what I want to do is I want to share with you some socialization and some fun activities that you can be doing with your kids to help teach those skills even during a pandemic. I want to add here that my husband is an ICU physician and a pulmonary physician over at Stanford, so he's very involved with COVID. And from the very beginning, back in March, as soon as we shut down, I started reading and doing a lot of research and keeping track of what was going on. So what I'm going to share with you has been approved by my physician husband, but also by all the research and the studying that I have done about this. So first of all, outside, we're so lucky that we live here in California and that the weather is still good. I know that I go to the gym, that El Camino Y, maybe some of you go there, but I go to the El Camino Y in Mountain View, and we have outdoor classes, and it's cold out, but we're still doing the outdoor classes. It's really good to get your kids outside. So here's some activities that I encourage you to think about, that if you look at them all, they're you can be, first of all of these, obviously, you need to be masked. and your kids need to be masked. I'm so impressed when I'm out. I live right across the street from both a school and a park that are right next to each other. My husband and I go for a walk almost every night. And I'm so impressed when I'm over there and I see the kids of very young age wearing their masks. So I know it can be done. So all of these activities, I didn't put it on here, but yes, they're masked. But you can ride bikes and you can ride scooters and you can be on roller skates and you can be on skateboards, whether they're doing that by themselves, whether they're doing that with a friend. If everyone has a mask on, it's okay. The other day I was over at the park, maybe about a month ago, and there was a group of boys running around. They were probably about 10 years old, and there were about 5 of them, and they were having a water gun fight. And I thought, well, how much fun is that? I mean, that's totally distance. They're not right on top of each other, because they're trying to shoot each other and not get wet themselves. So they were very distant. So I thought that that was a really good idea. Walking and hiking are great things to be doing. I go on a 5-mile walk twice a week at Shoreline, and I have my mask on. And when I get to within 10 feet of people, I put my mask up. And when I get 10 feet past them, I take it down. So have a mask with you while you're walking or you're hiking. And I put it here or in a stroller, because if you have little ones, it's harder for them to stay away from people. But if you put your little one in a stroller, then the rest of the family can go on a walk. Here's some other things. You can play soccer, you can shoot baskets, you can play catch and kickball and jump rope. So we want to get our kids outside. We want them to be active. These are things that, I mean, if you're playing soccer and just kicking a ball back and forth, again, you're not touching with your hands. You're interacting with each other, you're taking turns, you're sharing, you're doing those skills that we want our kids to be developing. I also said that you can play with bubbles or water or play with leaves, as this little one is doing. So there's things like that you can do. And then I also came up with a section I call parallel play. For those of you who know that term, parallel play is what we talk about with toddlers when they're next to each other and they're playing, but they're not really playing together, but they're next to each other. So I'm just using that term. I had a mom tell me that her son plays Battleship, and I thought, wow, you know that game, that board game Battleship, and I thought, wow, that's a great game for them to play because they can sit 6 feet away from each other and they're not touching the same thing, so they can play Battleship. I had a girl, an 11-year-old girl, tell me that she started a book club with her friend, so I thought that was a great idea. You can do art projects, you can do Play-Doh, you could do some sidewalk chalk. So there's all kinds of outside things, outdoor things that your kids can be doing that will develop those socialization skills. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. And then inside, you guys are all pros at inside more than me, but I did want to share some ideas that you can do inside that, again, develop those socialization skills that we need. So I'm not sure how many of you are doing this. Most of the parents I'm talking with have set something up so that their children can study with a friend. So they have a study buddy. So they have somebody that they can connect with online, either in Zoom or Google Hangout, or even on the phone, old-fashioned phone, talk on the phone, but that they can connect with and they can study with. You're probably all doing puzzles and games and cards, but those are ways of sharing and playing together and taking turns. So those are good things. There's all kinds of interactive online games that your kids can play with other kids. Hopefully you know those other kids, but ways of having your kids be socializing. Cooking and baking, to me, I'd much rather my kid be cooking and baking than doing a math worksheet. But those are things that you can be doing. And, maybe when you bake, you bake and you take the cookies over to your elderly neighbor next door. Or you share some of your cooking, or you share some of your baking. So that, again, that's one of those skills that we want our kids to have, is the idea of being empathetic and caring and loving and sharing. Those are all wonderful things. Your older kids could read to the younger kids. They could read to the dog or the cat. So they're working on reading, but they're also working on, being kind and helping out and pitching in. Obviously, you can connect online with family members. You could find a pen pal. Remember? I remember 100 years ago having a pen pal when I was a little kid. But so that would be something fun to do, a way, again, of sharing and interacting. And then, of course, if you have a study buddy, maybe you also have a social buddy. So maybe there's one friend that you are comfortable with, that you feel comfortable with your child playing with more than others. I understand that every family has to decide for themselves what kind of COVID risk you're comfortable with. It depends on who lives in your family. It depends on the medical condition of people in your family. But I do think it's healthy, and I do think it's okay at this point if your children have a social buddy. Okay, so now I just want to share a couple quick tips about taking care of yourself. Okay, because I don't think that we can do as good a job taking care of our kids unless we take care of ourselves. So first of all, I know this goes against everything we think of, but you need to make yourself number one. And yes, I said it. I know we don't believe that, but we need to make yourself number one. You're the center. I said you're the fulcrum of the scale, and you can't balance anything if you're not okay. You can't make your children be okay if you're not okay. So like when we used to fly, remember the good old days when we used to fly, and we're told to put on our own mask before we put on our kids' mask. I really believe that. I want you to take care of your emotions first, and it's okay to say to your kids, I just can't play with you right now. It's okay to say to them, I need a break. It's okay to say to them, I'm kind of in a bad mood. I always wanted my kids to understand that I was Susan as well as I was mom. I think it's a good thing and a healthy thing for kids to get that. So please, absolutely, work on taking care of yourself. And then I also just want you to be aware of, be aware of your own emotions. This is a scary and stressful time. Hopefully, the election being over, it takes our stress down a notch, or maybe it took it up a notch. I'm not sure, but we also had fires, and we have the pandemic, and we have teaching our kids from home, and we have working from home, and we have the uncertainty of how much longer this is all going to last. So this is a scary and stressful time for a lot of people. And again, as I said earlier, your kids are watching you all the time, right? So we need to try to really have an optimistic, positive attitude when our kids are around us. If you're having a tough time, go in your room and take a break. If you're having a tough time, go in your room and call your mom or call your dad or call a friend. But when we're around our kids, we need just to try to be aware of our own emotions and try to portray, a more positive attitude. Okay, and then the last thing I want to do in my presentation is just do a little bit of talking about some healthy communication. I think so many of the problems that we have with our kids or with our partner, with our friends, is when we're not communicating in the right way. If we're able to communicate better, I think then we're able to work things out and figure things out a lot easier. So my first tip about healthy communication is I want you to listen and talk with your kids the same way you want them to listen and talk with you. So when they say, they want to talk to us and I'm doing the dishes, what I really need to do is rinse my hands and turn off the water and turn to my kids and say I'm listening. Because when I go and talk to my kids and they're playing a video game, I want them to pause it and turn and look at me. So I need to do the same thing. I want my children to speak to me politely. So I'm going to be polite. I'm going to say please, and I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to say it organically. I'm not going to go say please. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just going to say, hey guys, please come to the table. It's dinner time. I'm going to talk to my kids the same way I want them to talk with me. Again, they're watching and they're learning, and I need to be role modeling healthy communication. I want to tell you that I'm assuming since you're in the 6th District PTA, you have, elementary school kids, though I'm sure some of you have youngers and some of you have olders. But with our little tiny ones, with our toddlers, we talked a lot, and that was very, very appropriate. It's the right thing to do is to talk a lot. But as your kids get older, we need to talk less and we need to listen more. Listening is much more important than talking. I used to manage crisis hotlines for parents and teens, and that was always the number one rule was your job is to listen. Nobody, when people call a hotline, and this was a long time ago, so it's when we actually used phones, talked on the phone, but people would call a hotline because they had something to say and they were looking for somebody to listen. Your kids are looking for someone to listen to them, and I want it to be you that listens to them. So children tell me all the time that they don't get listened to. Parents tell me all the time, my kids don't listen to me. And what parents mean when they say that is they mean that my kids don't obey me. My kids don't do what I tell them to do. But when kids say to me, my parents don't listen to me, what they mean is my parents don't listen to me. They don't let me finish my sentence. They don't let me explain myself. They don't seem to understand. So we need to do a really good job of listening to our kids. I think most of you don't have a teenager yet, but you want your teenagers to talk with you, because if they don't talk with you, they're going to talk to somebody else. I want it to be me that they talk to. I also believe that they can't let go and move on until they feel heard and understood. So we need to talk less and listen more. I like to say we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so use them proportionately. A third tip I have here is I really want you to be empathetic, and I really want you to look at things through your children's eyes. We tend to hear something from our kids and immediately respond to it from our own perspective, but I want you to look at it from your child's point of view. And when your child says, oh, I hate math, and we go, no, you don't, you're good at math. Well, that's not very empathetic. We need to say, oh, wow, what's going on with math today? Let them know you get it. Let them know that you're empathetic and that you understand. And if your child says, can I have a cookie? And you go, no, you can't have a cookie. It's too close to dinner. That's not very empathetic. But if you say, oh, a cookie does sound good, but it's too close to dinner, that's much more empathetic. So I want you to let your children know that you hear them and you understand them, and it's okay that they're saying what they're saying. The best places to talk are kind of side by side. Kids have a hard time when we say, sit down and look at me. They don't do well with eye-to-eye contact, but they do well with side-by-side contact. So especially with boys, if you have an activity to do, if you could play catch or throw a ball back and forth, or if you picture your boys when they used to have friends over and they'd sit on the couch and they'd play a video game, it's side by side and it's much better. So even during meals, you're side by side. At bedtime, you are side by side because they can be laying down and you can be rubbing their back and you can have a great conversation. I tucked my kids into bed for years, and the last thing I said after we had read stories or whatever, I said, Now tell me about your day. And that's when they would tell me that they'd gotten in trouble at school, or a friend had been mean, or they'd spilled their milk. Because all your kids are smart, and they'll figure out that if they talk a lot at bedtime, they get to stay up later. So they're going to talk and talk at bedtime because that's what they like. And the final piece here is we need to be willing to talk when they're ready to talk. A lot of us are like, come in here, we want to talk now. Well, if they're not ready to talk now, then it's not going to work. So if we can be tuned into when they're ready to talk, it's going to go much better. And the final thing that I'll share about communication is I really encourage parents not to yell. Um, I've been speaking to 6 district schools for a long time, so maybe some of you have seen me. And I used to always share a product with you, and I'll tell you about my product. I was raised in a really dysfunctional family. When I was 4 years old, I had an older brother and an older sister. And my father, when I was 4, went to jail very suddenly in the course of one day. One morning, I said goodbye to him as he went off to work, and then he went to jail that day. And it was many, many years before I saw him again. And my mother became a very angry person, and she started yelling. And so I said, "Oh, when I grow up, I'm going to work with children, and I'm going to be a mommy, and I'm not going to yell." And then I became a mommy, and I yelled, and I knew it was wrong, and I knew it was a problem. So I did 2 things. One thing I did was I put a rubber band on my wrist, and that's the product that I used to pass out. I have wristbands that say, "Don't yell, just tell." But I put a rubber band on my wrist, and every time I started to yell, I snapped it. And every time I thought about yelling, I snapped it. And every time I saw it, it reminded me that I was working on not yelling. So that was really helpful. But the other thing that I did was when I felt myself getting angry at my children, I just took a deep breath, and I took a step back, and I pretended that it was someone else's child, because I would never yell at someone else's child. So I would pretend it was my nephew, or it was a friend or a neighbor, because I wouldn't yell at them. Oh, I'd be a really cool parent then. I'd be like, "Yo, yo, yo, that's not allowed. Please don't do that anymore." And they would stop. But with my own kid, I would yell. So those are my 2 tips. If you are a yeller, it just doesn't work. Yelling might stop a behavior at the moment, but it doesn't stop it long term. So don't yell, just tell. And the final thing that I just want to pop in here is that um, um, my website and my contact information is down there. Um, um, a lot of you are going to, at the end of this workshop, going to say, "I didn't get my question answered," or you're going to think of a new question tomorrow. I offer free 20-minute phone consultations. I told you I'm a coach. So, but I talk with everyone. I say 20 minutes. It might last a lot longer than 20 minutes. But please feel free to reach out to me through my website, or my email is on there. I think that Eric is going to kindly send out this contact information, so you don't have to take it down right now. But I just wanted to pop that up there, so that you know that if I don't get to your question, you please feel free to email me or call me tomorrow. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. So we're gonna get back to that. And Dawn, are you able to see the questions?
Yes, I was able to see the questions.
Great.
We have several questions for you. So I'm going to start at the top.
Great.
One parent says that they're seeing a distinct difference between their kids in their levels of independence. The 14-year-old is very independent, but the 12-year-old is not at all and wants the parents to do everything for them. And how do we encourage the 12-year-old to be more independent when they're very reluctant?
Yeah, so it's interesting. What we're seeing a lot of with kids is a lot of our kids are regressing. So they're kind of doing some backwards development, and a lot of our kids are not moving as fast forward as we thought they would. So, so first of all, very, very typical that we look at a 12-year-old and we say, oh, we think they can handle this, but maybe they're reluctant to do it. So what you're also seeing in this family by the mom or dad who posted that, is that, kids are different. For those of you who have two children like I do, kind of they're opposites. They figure out they need to be different from their sibling. So I think what happens is we're often surprised when the younger one is not the same as the older one, but very, very typical and very, very common. So I think that one way to encourage your 12-year-old is, the question says, our 12-year-old wants us to do everything for them. Don't. Just don't. Say, you know what? If you need some help getting started with that, we can help you. But we have confidence and we have trust, and we know you can do that. Even if you want our help, that's okay. We will help you get started, or maybe we'll help you do most of it. But if you are encouraging to that 12-year-old, if you are letting them know that we trust you and we have confidence in you, I think that you will see them doing more for themselves. And also, sometimes kids ask us to do something for them just because it's easier if we do it, right? I always like to say, don't do anything for your children if you know they can do it for themselves. Okay, so maybe just if you find yourself doing too much, if you do a little less, I think your child will do a little bit more.
So the next question is, how do I get my teenager to exercise? He's so busy with school pretty much the whole day.
Yeah, it's really a problem because there's no way to force your child, right? You can't make them go out. You can kind of talk to, especially since it's a teenager, just talk to them and say, what are we going to do about this? It's healthy. We want you to get some exercise. We'd like you to, how many times do you think you should exercise a week? And maybe they go 0. And you go, no, in our family, we want it to be more than 0. So I think that you just can kind of try to work that out with your teenager. The other thing is that there is no school on Saturday and Sunday. And so maybe as a family, you can go on a hike. As a family, you can go on a bike ride, or you can just, you have to decide if you want to make it a rule that your child exercises X number of times a week. If you make it a rule, then you're going to have consequences and follow through with that. With a teenager, I would just try to work that out together. I wouldn't make it a big deal. I would make it be that he needs to, do school and be polite and follow curfew, and those things are more important. And just really talking with our kids and saying, hey, how are we going to work this out, is a great way to handle a problem like that.
The next question is, my middle schooler, sorry, I lost it. My middle schooler has significant anxiety, general, social, and separation, and he actually prefers to be at school. He prefers to do school at home. He has become even more insular and won't even leave the house now, even for a walk around the neighborhood. How can I encourage his socialization without triggering his anxiety?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There are so many kids who actually are thriving by doing school at home because some kids were being bullied at school. I do a lot of work with anti-bullying. Some kids were being bullied at school, so they're much happier being home. Some kids have great anxiety, and so they're much happier being home. Obviously, I don't know, this parent. I don't know this child. If you are concerned that your child has significant anxiety, I perhaps would talk with the pediatrician about that and see if there's some techniques that we can use to help them. I also would be willing to leave the house with my child. So I wouldn't demand that they go on a walk by themselves. I would say, would you please go on a walk with me? So I would offer lots and lots of support. It will be interesting to know and see what changes come when school comes back in session. But I agree with you that we don't want to trigger that anxiety. We don't want to make things worse. But also maybe you can come up with some other ways, some of those other tips that I've given you, like an online game with a friend, right? So that there is some interaction with a friend, but it's not necessarily in person.
Our next question is, any tips on how we can do positive behavior incentive activities effectively? We're trying different activities or behavior charts, but it's not helping. My son is in first grade and he does not want to do any schoolwork. He does not like screen time and he has a meltdown daily. These concerns of distance learning is deteriorating his mental health and my connection with him. Thank you for your feedback.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough. I mean, who can fault a first grader for not liking screen time, right? I mean, he doesn't want to sit in front of that darn Zoom and stare at it. When you think about it, I mean, I don't know that I have the energy or the bandwidth to just sit and look at something. Um, Behavior charts usually don't work. Which is why it's probably not working here. Sometimes behavior, rewards work for a little while, but then they quickly lose their effectiveness. I don't know if a parent is able to sit next to this little guy while he's doing school. Certainly not for the full day, but just to give a little support. I'll sit with you the first few minutes of math, and then I'm going to go away for 15 minutes and then come back and see how you're doing. I don't know if that will help. You might think about when we say our child has a meltdown daily, think about, when is that? Is it more in the morning? Is it more in the afternoon? Is it more at night? Think about what's happening to contribute to that meltdown, and also think about ways that you can be understanding and empathetic, but also don't give him a lot of attention for the meltdown. We want to give attention to kids for behavior we like and withhold some attention for behaviors we don't like. So we need to pay a little bit of attention to what we're doing when he is melting down. And for this mom, definitely, or dad, reach out to me, and so we can talk about that a little bit more. But it's very common. I speak to parents every day who say, I don't know how to get my kid to sit in front of the screen all day long. I know that it's very tough.
So the next question is, any tips on positive discipline? I heard of doing a calming corner, but anything else?
Yeah, so positive discipline. So let's think about the fact that discipline means to teach. So, discipline doesn't mean yelling and grabbing and, punishment. It literally means to teach. So, positive discipline, how can we teach them in good ways? I think a calming corner, depending on the age of the child, it can be effective as long as it's not a banishment. If we are sending our child to the calming corner for them to calm themselves down, that's not always going to work depending on the age. They probably need more help from us um, to calm down, right? Because if they could calm themselves, they would, but they can't. So I think, in terms of discipline, it's kind of a funny question because I teach an hour-and-a-half class on positive discipline. So it's hard to answer it very quickly. But if you think about discipline, there's a rule and there's a consequence, and then we follow through. So I don't believe in punishing children. My children are sitting at the table. and they're arguing with each other, and I say, that's it, no dessert. That's a punishment. Um, if I say, I don't like this arguing. If you continue, there's no dessert. Then my children have a chance to stop and think and decide, am I going to make the choice to keep fighting? Am I going to make the choice to stop? I have to tell you a very funny story here. I was working, giving a talk, and a mom raised her hand and said, my 12-year-old son was on top of my 10-year-old son punching him. And I yelled, if you hit him one more time, there's no dessert tonight. And the 12-year-old pulled his hand back, turned around and looked at her and said, what are we having? So I really love that story. But the 12-year-old was stopping and thinking and trying to make the right choice. Okay, so for positive discipline, you tell them what the rule is, you tell them what the consequence is if they follow the rule, you tell them what the consequence is if they don't follow the rule, and then you follow through. And only give them choices that you're okay with, right? And it's okay to make a mistake. It should be okay. Your home should be the safe place where kids can make mistakes. So don't feel bad when your kids make a choice that you wish they hadn't made. You don't give them choices about health and safety, but you can give them choices about whether or not they come and pick up their jacket. And you can give them choices about whether they come to the table or not. And if they don't come to the table, then I used to say to my kids, if you're not at the table in 2 minutes, then you're not going to have dinner tonight. And if they didn't come to the table in 2 minutes, then they didn't get dinner that night. Because I only had to do that once before they learned I'd better go to the table when I'm called. Okay, so that's a 1 minute summary of positive discipline.
So the next one is, our freshman high schooler has been encouraged or felt compelled to join social media like Facebook and Instagram, and we have concerns about these sites as whether they're appropriate for developing social connections. Any thoughts, and how can we help them manage the potential mental health fallout from social media?
It's such a great question. You know, there can be really bad mental health effects from social media when kids are getting bullied or kids feel bad about themselves or they're comparing themselves. But it also can be a positive thing. There's a lot of, kids are learning and interacting, and so you're right. I think that if for any child who is starting on social media, you still need to be involved. So parents of a freshman kid, if he wants to join, I wouldn't let him or her just get on to 7 different social media sites at once. I would say, which one thing do you want to start with? Do you want to start with Facebook? Do you want to start with Instagram? Okay, well then let's together, let's figure out how do we get that set up. And I need to be involved at least in the beginning still, right? So if you ease your kid into using social media, then I think it's a much better way than just saying, sure, go ahead. You still need to be involved. You still need to be participating. As your freshman gets older and becomes more responsible and more independent, you can back off. But in the beginning, you need to be more involved. And you also can do some research and talk with your freshmen about, what do you think are the positives of being on social media, and what are some of the negatives? Because I'm guessing your freshman knows a lot about that. And I would make that be a family decision, but definitely let them ease into it and you be involved, especially in the beginning.
So we had another question. One parent says, I would love to listen. How do you get a teenage daughter to talk beyond the yes, no, good, or not really? That's all the kid's saying, I guess.
Yeah. So they say yes or no because you're asking yes, no questions. You can't ask yes, no questions. so, you're absolutely right that a lot of kids don't want to talk, but I think that we have to think about, if all we're doing is quizzing our kids, if what we're saying to our kids, what did you do today? Oh my gosh, that's a boring question. When I finish this talk, I'm going to go out in the other room and my husband is going to say, how did it go? And I'm going to say, fine. because I've just done it and I don't want to talk about it anymore. Right? So I think we have to think about what kind of questions we're asking our kids. And sometimes we don't need to ask them a question. We can say something. Right? So just go, oh man, that election, that drove me crazy. As opposed to, and what do you think about the election? Just kind of make a statement. The other thing is, let's try to talk about things that interest them. So let's find a TV show that we can watch together, or let's talk about politics if they're interested. So I think making statements, not so many questions, talking about things that interest them. And the other thing that I always found, that if I started talking about myself, my kids would get really bored, and then they would want to talk about themselves just to get me to be quiet. So I would say, oh my gosh, I had such a rough day. And then they would interrupt to tell me about their rough day. So I think that those are all some tricks to get them to talk. And also, depending on the age of the child, asking your teen to educate you is a really good way to get kids to talk. So I can remember one time I was working with a boy, and I said to him, so if I came to your school, would I find a lot of drugs on campus? As opposed to saying, so do you smoke pot? Right? I made it a broad question, but asking kids to educate you is another good way of getting them to engage and want to talk with you.
So the next question is another one about the internet. How do you get a 10-year-old boy, how do you keep a 10-year-old boy from continually looking at other websites than YouTube when he's supposed to be doing homework online or listening to the teacher?
Yeah, they're all doing it, just so you know that. I want you to know how many kids are doing that. And it's interesting, when kids were in school, I had a high school boy. He was going to an all boys school, and he told me that all of the kids, they all had Chromebooks, and he said all of the boys in my boys high school were all playing sports and looking at YouTube during class. Like, that's what's going on. So then I met with a teenage girl like 2 days later, and I said, so I hear all the kids are looking at YouTube and playing sports while you're supposed to be doing schoolwork. And she goes, no, we don't do that. We're shopping. So I think that this is a common thing, that kids figure out ways to look at other websites. For a 10-year-old, I would have a rule, and that I would say that if I come in and I find you on YouTube, or I find you looking at another website during school time, then you miss out and you lose the rest of your fun screen time for the rest of the day. Because most of our kids, have school time, but then of course we let them watch TV, or we let them look at YouTube and play video games. And I would just have that be a rule. If I catch you doing that, then you're going to lose your screen time for the rest of the day after school. And the other thing, and I will say this, if you have a 10-year-old kid who's looking at YouTube and doing other websites during school, but he's still getting all his work done, and he's still getting good grades, and his teacher is not angry with him, then maybe it's not that big a problem, right? We want to look at the whole thing, because it's really hard to keep our kid from looking at YouTube if he's in school in the dining room and you're in your office at your full-time job. It's hard to monitor. So I would look at the whole picture of how school is going, not just at the fact that he's looking at YouTube when he should be listening to the teacher.
Our next question is, could you share some ideas about volunteering opportunities for preteens around this time?
Yeah, it's really quite tough right now, because a lot of places that, maybe had volunteer opportunities, like churches or schools or preschools, I mean, we're just not open right now. I mean, the opportunity just isn't there. So I would think about doing something that just you yourself could do. I mean, maybe call up, find a local nursing home in your area and say, could we drop off some cookies? or just kind of finding something to do, or maybe finding somebody who your preteen could help out with a 4-year-old. Again, you'd have to be masked and you'd have to know the person. But right now, the volunteering is really tough because so many places just aren't available. So I would look to see what your family could do in terms of volunteering. And also, I used to take my kids to, like we're heading into Thanksgiving. So I would take my kids to Safeway and we would fill the grocery cart and then drive straight to Second Harvest Food Bank to drop off the food. So I know that's not the same kind of volunteering that you mean, but I think that there are lots of ways that we can make them feel needed and important and helpful.
So we have a couple more questions. One says, my teenager's schedule has completely changed. She's up till 4 or 5 in the morning and sleeps a few hours during the day. I'm very concerned, but she doesn't listen. And she says she has to finish her homework and she's completely burned out. What can I do to help her?
Yeah, so again, we need to look at what the whole school thing is, but clearly nobody should be up from till 4 or 5 in the morning. It's not healthy. We do know that a teenager's biological clock is different than ours. A teen's biological clock really works from like 10 in the morning till midnight, which is why when we're yelling at our kids to go to sleep and they're like, but I'm not tired, the problem is that they might be exhausted, but they're not sleepy, right? So it is hard for kids to fall asleep. But I totally, absolutely would put a limit on that. And I would say, if you need to stay up till midnight, which even that is much, much later, I don't know how she's sleeping during the day if she's in school. And I don't know if she's up until 5. So I would want a little bit more information about that. But I definitely would put some structure around that. And I would say we can't have that. I'd like you to go to bed at 11. You want to stay up till 4. So let's reach a compromise and say 12:30, because it is too late. Nobody needs to be up. And as you see, her schedule has changed for the worse. So, okay, let's do one more question.
Okay. This one is, my 9-year-old has ADHD and is really struggling with distant learning and anger over missing his friends. The do your homework and then have a fun activity doesn't motivate him. It makes him angry. Do you have any alternate ideas?
Yeah, I mean, with this little guy, we need to be really empathetic. We need to say, I understand that it's hard missing your friends. I also would try to connect him with a friend. Maybe this little guy really needs a social buddy, that somebody that he can, and even if it's not in person, that he can spend a little bit of time with online, or, and again, I mean, to me, it's like if you have a kid who comes over and they play in the backyard and they play catch, they're outside, they're masked, and there's distance. So I would say that this little guy needs some help. I also would speak to your pediatrician and see if they have any ideas of with the ADHD. I never know if a parent means we know they have it or if there's professionals involved with that. The other thing that I would do with a child with ADHD though is I think I've said I'm not a big reward chart person, but with this little guy, I would maybe, for every hour that he's in school, he gets 10 minutes that he can take a break. So, think about giving him some breaks. Think about giving him some rewards. If he finishes his math class, he gets a point. If he finishes the next class, and at the end of the day, if he has 5 points, then he's earned some extra screen time or whatever his currency is. I don't know what his currency is. Okay, should we do one more and then we'll stop?
Sure, we have another one for you. We just started socializing with a few families we feel comfortable with, and my youngest, who's 7, is having a hard time joining games and activities that she isn't naturally a part of. She finds ways to annoy the other children instead of finding a way to play with them. How can I help her to navigate this?
Yeah, so you want to do a little role playing with her. You know, you don't want to call her out while she's annoying somebody because then that's just embarrassing, right? But when you get together and you say, you know, we're going to go and we're going to see our friends tomorrow and talk about, there might be a game, there might be a game that you don't want to play, and so how do we act? So in other words, she needs some role playing, she needs some coaching to help her figure that out. And we also want to make sure that the other kids aren't, you know, overpowering your daughter. Maybe your daughter isn't being given a chance to suggest a game, or maybe she's suggesting a game and the other kids aren't listening to her. So you might want to like just check in and kind of see how some of that's going, but to do a little bit of role play and a little bit of coaching. And even in the moment, you could take her aside privately and say something to her to help her get back in. But, you know, it is hard to show up, and if everybody's already in the middle of the game, it's hard to get into it, right? So we need to teach our kids. Everything needs to be taught, and we need to teach them long before they need to do it by themselves. Um, I know that we have lots more questions, but we're going to have to wrap it up at this point. I urge you, please feel free to send me an email with your question. I also want to tell everybody that I'm going to be back. I think it's in March. I'm going to be back with you in March. And so maybe we'll get a chance to be you know, ask some more questions then. But I would love to talk with any of you. I do work with parents. I work with kids of all ages, including college age kids. I saw that question pop up. My coaching rate is $130 an hour. My book is, and it's a full hour. My book is $15. And I certainly do look forward to hearing from you. I want to thank you very much again for everybody being here tonight. I'm so impressed that you have the energy to be here after a really long day of parenting. So, and Eric and Dawn, thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight, and thank you for your help.
Thank you so much for coming, Susan. We really enjoyed your talk. And I want to remind everyone that we do have more talks coming up. And 6th District PTA is just really trying to help parents in this difficult time. And Susan, thank you so much for your advice this week.
Thank you so much. I'll see you guys in March. Everybody stay well and stay healthy, and I'll watch for your emails. Bye-bye.
Bye.